Good morning. Good morning. Well, welcome everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Evan, and my wife Lindsay and I pastor the church here at the Coastlands, and I'm so glad you're here with us this morning on this wonderful Labor Day weather weekend. Finally, after a whole summer of like non-summer weather, from my perspective, we're finally getting something here. Very happy about that. Well, I wanted to give you a little bit of an update about my covenant creature. Some of you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll explain it to you. We've been talking for many weeks now about this concept of covenant in the scriptures, which is the way that God has designed relationships to work. And really, the biggest purpose of covenant is to secure the people who are in covenant and to celebrate who they are, to make a little zone that isn't just okay for them to be who they are, but like who they are is celebrated. It's accelerated. It's accentuated. It's just, you know, you can be who you are in this safe place. Your future is secured. That's what covenant is supposed to do. So my wife and I were getting together, and we were talking about each of our three kids and what we know about each of them, trying to identify, you know, a little bit of something that we could provide a little covenant space to encourage them in who they are. And for one of our daughters, we basically landed on the fact that she just loves animals like so much. And I myself am not an animal lover. I don't hate animals. They're just a big fat zero for me. Like, they don't do anything for me. Like, as long as, you know, you don't get too close to me, because most animals smell. And as long as your fur's not on me, I don't got issues with you. But if you get your fur on me, you start smelling me up, like, that's no good. So I don't like that. But, you know, we didn't really grow up with animals in our house. I think we had a fish who died in the big earthquake. That's about all I can remember. But my wife also grew up kind of in a farm-like setting. You know, she and her sister rode sheep as little girls. So her growing up was totally different than mine. And it just dawned on me, like, I'm creating an environment where, like, my wife and then now one of my daughters is almost like having to defend liking animals. And I was just like, what am I doing? So then this is what I was thinking. Let's just start to have the conversation. And then before I knew it, my wife went to the animal store, and she was calling me about, like, I looked into the eyes of this creature, and I just knew this was the one. I know you don't know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't remember looking into the eyes of that fish that died at the big earthquake, like, you're the one, fish. And so she purchased this animal whose name is a different animal name. His name is Moose. It is not a moose. It is a cat. I bought a cat. I did the unthinkable. Well, I want to give you an update. This is many, many, many weeks ago. I want to give you an update. Since that time, no, I have not fallen in love with Moose. Every animal person says, like, oh, but just you wait. Just you wait until their smell gets on you and all their fur is all over you, and then you're going to love them. I'm like, I don't think you know me. That's the opposite of what's going to happen. But this guy, first of all, it's a guy. That feels good. I've got a lot of females around me in my house, like all girls in my house except for me. So like now it's like me and Moose. Like I get that. I'm like, you do your thing, dude. I'm going to do my thing. He's outside. I'm predominantly inside. I feel good about that. But Moose has caught at least 6 rats and 1 gopher. Hello, a gopher, guys. Like predator, like getting in the ground and grabbing that gopher right out of the ground. Let's go. And you know, puts it on display for us to see, which I am like, I'm like unreasonably happy about. I'm like, yes, yes. Kids, get a bag. We're putting this thing in the trash. Yes. And then, of course, the daughter that loves animals is like, oh, no, but the mouse is so cute. I'm like, the only thing attractive about a mouse is when it's headless. That's kind of where I'm at. Get those creatures out of my... Anyway. So I'm starting to think there's something about this covenant thing that I'm really onto something here. Moose and covenant. Every time I see that cat prowling around outside, I think, #covenant. There it is. Walking around out there. And my daughters are very happy. The one daughter who, is very animal-oriented, she'll, go out back and, get down on her hands and knees, meowing for, if we let her, she would do it for, a half an hour. Meow. And she's like, well, if I get down and I start meowing, then maybe Moose will, want to come around because he might think that I'm a cat, too. And I'm like, sounds good. You can go for it, girl. And she, crawls around, in the bushes, totally, getting into the cat thing. So she's not allowed to eat the food. That's a boundary. We're not going to do that. But she, pretends to eat the food, She's doing her whole thing, and that's cute. That definitely melts my heart. But I also have my toy up here. My teaching tool. This is a visual aid that me and a couple guys came up with together to exhibit the principles of covenant, that it's kind of like a piece of machinery with different components, multiple components, and that's really important. There's not just one component, but there's multiple. But they have to be in the right alignment, otherwise it just doesn't really work. But when everything is in perfect alignment, then when you turn the crank of covenant, you get the outcome of covenant, which is the little propeller that is blowing the soft wind of covenant on our faces. But if you take out one of the elements of covenant, even though you have some of the other elements and you try to turn the crank, it just doesn't produce the outcome that God intended. Also, you might be thinking, hey, I have all the elements, but you put it in the wrong location. And even though you have that element, that was almost disastrous. I was like, I'm losing it. Oh, okay. Even though you have all the elements on the board, so to speak, if they're not in the way that God says, this is how you are to align these things. This is the way that I want you to be doing this. And you just decide, you know what, I'm going to take my gear and I'm just going to put it where I so see fit. And then you try to covenant. It doesn't work. But the great news about God is that there's always hope for our future, and that we can learn things, we can repent, we can rearrange things in our lives such that it is in right covenant, which is to say right alignment, and then it works again. That's a really good picture of repentance, I feel. Something was missing, I repent, and God helps me put it right back in the same place, and then almost immediately, it's starting to work again. So we've been talking a lot about different elements of covenant, and the one that we've been covering for the last few weeks is something that I've been calling shared history. This is the idea that you can't be in a covenant relationship with someone if there's no closeness, there's no intimacy, if you're not sharing experiences together, if you're not, being together. But what I want to talk about this morning is almost like the act of turning the crank, which is different than the component itself. It's like how to move this component, how to turn that crank. And that's something that I'm going to call rehearsing history. I'm going to explain that in a minute. But if you have your Bibles with you, why don't you open up to the book of Mark chapter 6, if you want to follow along. This is an episode with Jesus and the disciples that is so comforting for me because the disciples, as is often the case, completely missed the point of what God was trying to do. And the Bible makes that sometimes savagely clear in the way it describes they were clueless. We're going to read an episode that puts on display this principle, this truth about rehearsing history and how it's supposed to work in covenant. Before we get into it, I'm just going to say, This particular part of covenant is a little mind-bendy. Like, you kind of got to wrap your head around it, and it's a little bit like, but it is extremely easy to do. So I'm going to try to explain it so you can really understand it, but it's super, super easy to do. So here's how it works. In covenant, my experiences with a person or with God establishes like a little groove in my heart and my soul that then causes me to expect my future with that same person is basically going to be what I have already experienced from them. In other words, the kinds of things I've experienced from them are the kinds of things that I'm going to experience with them in the future. It's like a principle that bridges the gap between your past and your present with someone you have a relationship with and the future that you can expect to have with them. So let me talk about a positive, for instance, of this. When you really experience the love of God, like just the unbridled, unvarnished, unadulterated love of God, even though later on in life, maybe you do something that you know was wrong, and you want to go to God, even though you know you've done something wrong, because you have experienced his great love in your life before, that's established a groove in you, so that even though you know you've been wrong, you go back to him, you're expecting him, and rightfully so, that he is going to be loving to you, even though the context of where you are today is different than where you were yesterday, because that's how covenant works. God has been loving to me in the past, and then I know because of that, he is going to be loving to me no matter what in the future. It establishes, it secures the kind of future that I get to have with God or with this person based upon the past that I've had with him. Let me talk about a negative example. Imagine a person who grew up with a parent who maybe they were there, but they basically just communicated, I don't really care about your life. I don't really care about what you care about. And that parent, in one way or another, has made it clear to the child that, like, I don't really care what's going on with you. That child will grow up, and it will be very difficult for that child to believe that anyone would really care about the things that I care about, much less God caring about what's going on with me. I'm not saying it's impossible for them. I'm saying that experience as a child puts a groove into the soul that is basically like what I have experienced is what I am going to experience. And I think really for many of us, if you breathe air, probably there's something about covenant that is kind of off in your heart and mind and soul. So then when you approach God, you approach him not necessarily based upon 100% of what is true of God, but might have been true of your parents, might have been true of that boss, might have been true of a friend that turned her back on you. And that's how you approach God, because those experiences have put a groove in your heart and your soul. Now, the good news is that if that is true, if there's a groove in your heart and your soul that is off, that's not right, that's broken and very hurtful, God is a God who can, so to speak, fill in that groove, so it's not a groove anymore, and establish a new one. A new one. So we're going to read about an episode where the disciples are described as having a heart that was really hard. And they didn't even realize that the experience that Jesus did with them just prior was supposed to give them a reference point about the kind of Jesus that they could experience with him today. They completely missed this. And like I said, that brings me comfort. Mark chapter 6, verse 45, we're going to read an episode. Now you have to understand that a part of the purpose of this episode, the experience they had with Jesus in this story, is connected to the one right before it where Jesus fed more than 5,000 people with very little food. You know, a little boy comes up to him and says, hey, I've got some bread and fish. Does this help? And God's like, I can use that, which is basically my concept of ministry. Like, hey, God, I've got some bread. Will this help? And God's like, I can use that to do, the actual thing, which is much more than I can supply. So he feeds 5,000 people, and then we pick it up in verse 45. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of Bethsaida, while he himself was sending the multitude away. And after bidding them farewell, he departed to the mountain to pray. And when it was evening, the boat was in the midst of the sea, and he was alone on the land. And seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and he intended to pass by them. I don't know why. I find that last part, like, hilarious. Like, he's just going to do a quick pass by, you know? How you guys doing there? You okay? All right, go by. It kind of reminds me of, like, in my house, when my kids are either, like, making the wrong kinds of noises, like banging or something like that, or no noise. That's what I need to do. I need to do a little walking on water walk by, you know, like, what's going on in there? It's one time one of my daughters, she's not the kind of child that you don't hear. Does that make sense to you know what I'm talking about? Like, you hear her. And then I remember not hearing her for a while, and I'm like, where did she go? She, like, disappeared. And I looked all over the house. I was getting a little worried. And then finally, I found her in my shower, which is a destination location. Like, you don't like go in the shower like on the way to somewhere else. Like, you have to make a big old fat U-turn, and then that's like the end of the road, right there in the shower. And then the shower's even like, you know, you go into the bathroom, and then like the shower is like to the right, like around the door. So like she was around so many things. And I found her sitting in there, and I was calling her name, and then I just was like, I popped my head in the bathroom, and in the shower. She'd never done this before. And she was just sitting there like this. She was eating something that she was not allowed to eat. I did a little more than just a walk by on that one. You know what the saddest part was, though? The thing that she snuck, so it was bad that she hid. That's not okay. That's, you know, that's not okay. But the thing that she snuck was veggie straws. I can tell some of you know what veggie straws are. If you don't know what veggie straws are, imagine eating hay and a lot of air. And that is better than veggie straws, okay? That's like what that is. And it's like borderline healthy for you know what I mean? It's like she snuck an apple or something, and like, you know, I'm like, man, girl, you didn't even like sneak chocolate or something. It's like you snuck a healthy thing, and so that was just sad on a couple different levels. Anyway, so Jesus, you know, sees them, and he's like, I'm just gonna do a walk by. I'm just gonna do a little, how's it going in the boat there? Verse 49, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed that it was a ghost and cried out. It's like a bunch of men, you know what I mean? Ah! I mean, there's a man walking out there. They thought it was a ghost. You know, that was like the most likely explanation they could offer, like, it's a ghost. For they all saw him and they were frightened. But immediately he spoke with them and said, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. Which I feel like that's just like, how could you not? You know, like, you're walking on the water. And then he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were greatly astonished, just mouth open. What? But listen to this, verse 52. They had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened. So when I first read that, I mean, I don't know if you can see this, but in my Bible, in the margin, there's a question mark. And especially when I was first, like, really getting into my Bible, I encountered so many things I didn't understand, and I would just put a question mark by that thing and pray, God, I pray a smart person explains this to me one day, or let's talk in heaven, you know? I don't know, but I don't get it, and I'm moving on. So this is one of those things that I really didn't understand. But God has since that time given me some understanding, and I wanted to share it with you. I was confused what in the world Jesus walking on water had anything to do with the loaves. And I'm kind of like, I mean, I get the disciples. What lesson exactly were they supposed to learn from the loaves that apparently was supposed to teach them about, you know, Jesus walking on water? That seems like a very non-intuitive jump to me, you know? Like, I'm multiplying bread. Remembered this on the lake, you know? Like, okay, what? But when you look at this through the eyes of covenant, remember, what you experience with God before is supposed to put a groove in your soul that teaches you the very kinds of things that you will experience with him. We have this verse, I think it's in the back there. It's our denomination, Foursquare. It's like their seminal verse. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So how he has been yesterday is exactly what you can expect from him today and tomorrow. That's why your future is secured. So I looked at these two episodes, and I was trying to understand parallels between them. And I found a couple of things that didn't quite stick out to me at first blush, but when I looked into it further, I found some things. The first thing is that both of these episodes start with Jesus seeing someone with need, and then Jesus moved to do something about that. So the 5,000 people, they're really hungry. Jesus is like, this isn't good. We got to feed these people, and then he does something about it. And then the disciples struggling on the water, Jesus is like, this isn't good. I got to go there and be with them and help them because they're struggling. And it just makes me wonder, what had these guys experienced previous in their life that it was like totally shocking that God would come and help them? What kind of upbringing did they have? What kind of parents did they have? What kind of friendships did they have that basically taught them, no one's going to help you, so you got to look out for you? And so then it just shocked them that God would meet them in that place and to be able to do all this incredible stuff that they weren't able to do. It's one of the secrets about growing in God is connecting what he has done to what he promises that he will do. It's the bridge between the past and the present and then the future. All right. So this principle of how now let's talk about you, how you are today in your covenantal relationships is teaching the people around you what they can expect from you in the future. This is a really powerful principle and also super sobering. I recently had a conversation with somebody at work, and God used that episode to show me that I had been accidentally teaching people around me at work something that I didn't want to teach them. And they were changing their behaviors, they were changing their interaction with me based upon things that I had done in the past. Again, I did not realize that. And it all kind of came out in this conversation. Let me explain what I'm talking about. So this one gal at work, I was asking her for her team to send me a report because I needed to send it to a client. And I'm not like her direct supervisor, but I'm somewhat of an authority figure in our work structure for her. I said, hey, can you send me the report? And she says, it's not finished yet. I'm like, hey, no worries. Just send me whatever you have. We'll work on that together, and then we'll send it out, and it'll be all good. And I'm thinking in my mind, like totally genuinely, I'm thinking in my mind, like, I'm like the most amazing sort of boss ever. Because I'm willing to receive something from you that isn't done yet, and then I would take time out of my schedule to help you get it into a place where we could send it out. Like, you are so welcome. Tell your friends how awesome I am, how great it is to work with me, how gracious I'm being that I would allow you to do that. And I just doubled down on this, and she kept saying like, no, it's really not in a great place. I'm like, oh, I've seen so many partial reports, I used to be in your position. It's all good. It'll be all, no worries. It's all good. And she kept resisting. And then I was kind of like, what's going on here? What's going on here? And then I started, thinking about like a sort of boss, like, I'm no longer kind of asking you, I'm now telling you, send me the report. And then this is what she responds to me. She says, well, Evan, I just, me and my team, we just know. She was so nice about it, super respectful. She said, I know that you have really high standards. And so we don't want to send you something partial because we know it won't meet your standards. And I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with someone where like a human is talking to you, but really God's talking to you. And God like translated what she said, so to speak, to say something to me that essentially what she was saying is, Evan, you are super harsh. And we've learned that from many encounters with you before. And we just know if we send this to you, your response is going to be harsh. So we don't want to send it to you because we just basically know you're going to be harsh. That's what she was really saying. She said it so nice and respectful, but God helped me understand what was really going on. And God used that to help me realize that in the name of quality, we gotta have quality. We gotta do it right, guys. Come on. In the name of helping people grow, and that's good. That's important. We want people to grow. I want them to be able to do their best and to, achieve great things. But in the name of that, there's been this thread that's kind of like snuck its way in there, and I was all too eager a participant to allow it to get woven in there, that I've been really harsh. I've been really harsh with this team. And it stopped me like dead in my tracks, like, whoa. And then all of these things came to mind, these experiences that I had provided with them where they sent me a report, and I was remembering all of this, pretty savage criticism that I've sent back. So do you understand that? Like over time, I have taught them to expect from me savage criticism of their work product. But I didn't realize that, okay? Like seriously, in the genuineness of my heart, it's not like I'm like, yes, another opportunity to be savage. Over email, even better. I'll cut you deep. Obviously, I'm not thinking that. And then in that moment, I'm even thinking, I'm being amazing. What a good Christian testimony I'm giving in my workplace right now. And this team is dying from the weight of expectation that I have put on them. And then when that's made clear to me, now I really actually have a moment of, or an opportunity to give a real Christian testimony. A real Christian testimony is, am I going to be hardened of heart? Or am I going to be soft and change? Because I could just put it all on them. And can I just tell you guys, as a boss, pretty easy to do. Pretty easy to do. Because bosses can put expectation on their employees, and we call that work. But that's not covenant. It might be legit in the workplace, but it's not covenant. And my goal isn't necessarily, how do I say this? My highest goal is not to be a worker in the world. My highest goal is to establish covenant. And sometimes you need to choose a different way of being if that's what your goal really is. I could have legitimately just put that on them again and say, nope, this is what we need to do. This is how it is. This is the world we live in. Deal with it. Buck up. But I had a choice. And what I want is I want this gal and I want her team to all understand that I really care. I really, really do care about them. That's in my heart. That has always been in my heart. But I'm realizing I have done something to teach you otherwise. So I could say anything I wanted to. I can make all the promises in the world, but they're like, we just basically don't believe you anymore because our experiences have been different than what you're saying. How many times in marriage does that become the thing? You've said this so many times. And I hear you saying the words, I'll change, it'll be different. But it's hard to believe you because what you've taught me for the last 10 years is that what you're saying isn't true. A groove has been established in my soul, and so then you're saying all the right words, but it's so hard to even believe you again because of what you have taught me. See, that's broken covenant at work. Now, godly covenant is let's make a new history starting today. But you have to show it with your actions. Okay, so I'm going to turn back to Exodus chapter 3. You can too if you want to. But I want to make sure that we have time to do something at the end of the service that I really want to do. Exodus chapter 3. So what in the world does this have to do with rehearsing history? What even is that? What is rehearsing history? Rehearsing history is something that we all can proactively do that will basically help the covenant gears go. It's like turning the crank. What is rehearsing history? Rehearsing history is literally talking about the great past that we've had together and talking about that, rehearsing it, bringing it back to mind. Hey, remember when? is something that makes the people in that covenant want to have that same kind of good history again in the future. It's something that you can do to help repair covenant. It's something you can do even if covenant isn't broken, just do it on an ongoing basis. But as you rehearse your great history together, that will help you have a great future. That's kind of the way to take advantage of this principle. And how we learn this is God. This is what God does. Almost every time he establishes a covenant, do you know what he says? He's like, remember, I'm the God who did all these things in the past. Have you ever wondered about that? Like, why does God keep saying, I am the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Like, what is the utility and like, why are you doing that? He's doing that because he's reminding Israel, remember the kind of God I have been, to give you courage that that's the kind of God I'm going to be as I'm sending you into this thing. So in fact, I had a couple of people help me do some research, and they found that God says, I am the God of your fathers 48 times in the Bible. He says, I'm the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt 89 times in the Bible. And the vast majority of those times were not when he actually did those things. It was way after the fact when he was, for instance, saying, hey, go into the promised land. There's giants and stuff like that. But remember, I'm the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Do you understand that? So it's like it was a way of securing Israel for their future. The thing that God is saying, I've got this for you. And I got you as you do this, even though there's giants and, big, tall guys and stuff like that. But Pharaoh was tall in a way, and that's what I did back then. So that can give you confidence moving into this part of your future. He says that many, many times. He says it when they're delivering them out of Egypt. He says it when they were about to enter into the promised land. He said it after they went into the promised land, but they actually didn't go to the borders of the promised land. They still had more land to conquer. He did it then. He also reminded them when, in the book of Ezra, this is like after Israel totally blew it, horrible time of their history, and they were coming to repent and be cleansed. God reminded them again, remember, before you enter into this process of repentance, you need to remember, I'm the God who loved you so much that I delivered you, not because you deserved it, but just because I love you. And God reminded them right before they engaged in a time of saying, we have done wrong. Isn't that amazing? God's like, remember, I love you. And I'm proving it by those things that I did back then. He also says it used in the context of giving instructions about what's right and wrong. So he says, hey, do this and don't do that. And remember, I'm the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now, God wasn't saying, hey, you need to do me a solid. I did you a favor, and now you're going to do me a favor. That's not what it was. He was saying, do you see how when you follow me, great things happen? Like you remember the whole thing with Egypt? You followed me, and great things happened? Follow me in this instruction. Follow me in this right way of living, and those same kinds of things are going to happen. All right. So in Exodus chapter 3, verse 15, God is telling Moses, I'm going to send you into Pharaoh, the most powerful man on the earth then, and you're going to tell him to release his labor force, his free labor force, for no payment at all. And he's going to be like, sounds good. Verse 15, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations. It's really interesting. He says, this is my name forever, and then he says it like a slightly different way. This is my memorial name. Well, that phrase, memorial name, is actually one word in Hebrew, and it basically means like, this is my remembrance. And the idea is that we're supposed to go into our future always remembering what it was that God did. That's one of the powers of worship. When we worship God, we are remembering, we're bringing back to mind the things that God has done, and that's supposed to secure us for our future. It's like singing a song of remembrance. And in fact, that's the thing that I want us to do at the end of service today, is we're all going to sing a new song together. I know, you were already sweating. It's a little warm in here. We're going to sing a new song together, and what I want to lead you in is singing a song full of things that are personal to you that you can remember that God did for you. Memorial name. God says, this is who I have been to you, and this is how I will be to you in the future. This part about covenant, it's all about consistency. It's all about faithfulness. And I've been realizing some stuff in my own life about, here's a question I've been asking myself. Am I being consistent in my patterns with my spouse? Again, I might have all the right intentions in the world. I might say all the right words, but are my actions matching what it is that I'm saying? Am I being consistent in this stuff? If my wife has asked me to do something, am I consistently doing that thing, or is it a one-off thing? Do I have to require her to ask me to do it again and again and again? And the reason why, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost. If I don't do the thing that my wife has asked me to do, that teaches her she must ask me in order to get me to do it, which then teaches me that she'll ask me, so then I don't have to do it until she asks me. Then she asks me because I've taught her to ask me, and she's taught me that she asks me to do that thing, and then it just... And then 10 years go by, and then it all comes out. I want to be a man who is consistent towards my spouse and being proactive in things about that. It's one of the areas where I really think a third set of eyes on your marriage can be super helpful. For someone to say, hey, I've noticed that, this, that, or the other thing. And have you thought about that? And that can really help bring things to mind, can bring things to the fore that maybe you hadn't even really considered. Like, whoa, I didn't even realize I did that. Or with parenting, for instance, being really consistent with my children. Now, this doesn't mean that I spend every last waking moment with my children. That's an impossible expectation. And our lives are very, very busy, which I love. But it's a little bit of it's a mental exercise to figure out how can we provide that consistency with our children when we have all these other things going on. I believe that there's a way to make it work, but it is work. I really have to think it through. I have to be proactive in it. Otherwise, it could just fall by the wayside. But I want to be consistent with them. And in fact, it's one of the things that I have just the fondest memories of very, very normal things that my parents did with me, but very consistently. And I actually think that this is an area where some parents get totally off, thinking I have to provide the most mind-blowing experiences for my children, and then I'll rehearse that history. Like, hey, remember that time that we rented out Disneyland, just us? That was amazing. That's totally unrealistic. And could teach your children really bad habits like, oh, that's what parenting is like. Spending a bunch of money to do these incredible experiences and kind of ignoring the day in, day out stuff. That's not what I want to teach my kids. When I look back on my childhood, some of my fondest memories that I know just wore a groove into my soul, they're like the most random, I don't know if my parents thought that oh, this is what I'm doing, but it was what they were doing. It's one thing is my dad would play this game Stratego with me. I don't know if any of you know the game Stratego. It's a board game. It's a strategy board game. And my dad is ultra strategic, and he totally blew me out of the water because I was 9 years old. So come on, Dad, what's up with that? But I loved playing Stratego with him. He'd make a fire. I'd help him make a fire. My big job was crumple the paper and blow on the fire. I probably wasn't actually that helpful, but we'd build the fire together, and then we'd lie down on the floor and we'd play Stratego. And we did it a lot. We did a lot of Stratego. Or I remember my dad pouring my cereal bowl for me in the mornings. It's just these little experiences that have wore a groove into my soul that Dad's there. And Dad's always supposed to be there. Still to this day, if I got a flat tire on the road, I might call my dad. Even knowing he'd probably be pretty worthless in that situation because he's not really the mechanical-oriented kind of guy. But it's just how a child is supposed to look at Dad. Dad's always there. That's his big job. He's there. And dads, I think often instinctively are like, I'm going to be there no matter what. No matter what. I'm going to be there at your soccer game. I'm going to be there when you're painting your first art project. I'm going to be there. If you get drunk at a party, I'm going to be there because that's what dads do. Dads are there. Do you understand that comes from somewhere, though? That comes from God the Father, who literally is always there. He didn't even have to drive. He's in your heart. He's as close to you as he could possibly be. He's always ready to listen. And that teaches me a lot about the kind of thing that I want to be as a father to my kids, always ready to listen. Always ready to listen. Because that's what God does to me. How I am today is how I will teach my children what to expect from me in the future. What a horrible outcome if I teach my kids, hey, dad's super busy, so. Now the reality is there's stuff and there's an appropriate time for things. And, we also have to teach our kids about how to read the room, okay? And not every moment is the moment to say that particular thing. But if it really was something that they needed me at any moment, I would drop everything, anything and everything. And I learned that from my dad. And I hope I get to teach my kids the same thing. So this part of covenant is about consistency. It's about faithfulness. It's not about being the smartest or always knowing what to do or knowing like every last little bit of the Bible. I think a lot of it just really has to do with your presence and consistency. It might be that way in a friendship, like I'm just here for you. And like you need to talk about what's going on with your mom, like I'm just here. That is so covenant, man. That is covenant. One last thing I'll mention. Actually, worship team, would you come on up here? One last thing I want to mention about this idea of rehearsing history. Rehearsing history is all about saying, hey, remember when, that time when. My kids love this. Oh my gosh. I could say anything, any normal experience. Hey, remember that time when I tickled you in the living room and it was like really hot that day, like, ha, it's great. It brings us closer, and then they want me to tickle them again. It's like, it's covenant at play right there. Or, hey, remember that time when you threw up on my arm? And then I thought it couldn't get worse, and then you threw up on the shag carpet. And I realized it can get worse than the arm. It can get worse than that. Those kinds of things, if we make that the conversation in our families, if we make that the conversation in our friendships, I'm telling you, you will sense a difference in the intimacy, the closeness that you feel with one another if you rehearse the history. Let me mention one last thing before we all sing a new song together. We talked last weekend about unforgiveness. Unforgiveness is actually kind of a version of rehearsing history, but in a broken way. Because you're rehearsing the history of that thing that you did that hurt me. You're rehearsing history of the thing that was wrong. Where what the Lord does is he makes a future with us, not based upon our sin or our wrongness. He makes a future with us based upon his love for us. So if you are working on forgiving someone, advice that I would give you is try to think about rehearsing some good part of your history as a way to start. So let's talk about a friendship that's been broken. A friendship is broken, and they did something to really hurt you. If you can bring yourself to start to rebuild that relationship and say, hey, remember that time when we climbed that fence and you fell and you like scraped your face all bad? That was hilarious. I'm not sure how girls talk to each other, but anyway, for guys, like that would be effective. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're making a proactive decision to ignore, to set aside the thing that was done that was wrong, and instead emphasize some awesome experiences you've had with one another. That could be a way for you to begin to rebuild a relationship that has been torn in two. And I believe that's what God does. God does with us. This is what we're going to do right now. We have about 9 minutes or so. And ask the worship team to play some music. They're going to play pretty loud to make it as comfortable as possible for all of us to sing a new song to the Lord. And I want to explain what I mean by new song. New song just means I want you to sing any lyrics, any words that come to your heart. The key is that they come from your heart. This isn't American Idol, okay? There's no judges here. If you can't carry a tune, it doesn't matter. This is just, imagine your 3-year-old daughter, okay, in the living room saying, Daddy, Mommy, I want to sing you a song. And whatever comes out of that child's mouth is just awesome to that parent. That's how God looks at you in these kinds of moments. It doesn't matter what comes out of your mouth. But thinking about that scripture that says, this is my memorial name, God said, this is my remembrance, I just want you to recall anything that God has done consistently in your life that you want to thank him for. And then I want you to sing about it. You could just be one word. Shelter. Shelter. God, you're my shelter. You're my shield, or you're my comforter. And you could just say that one word over and over and over again. You're not trying to be good, so to speak. It's just supposed to come out of your heart. And if you make that a regular pattern of your life, I promise you, you will feel closer to God because you're exercising covenant with him. All right? So why don't we all stand up together, and the worship team is going to lead us. I'm going to be here too. We're just going to sing a song of whatever comes to your heart.